The good old clap, take one.
That's right.
How many of you knew what you wanted to be when you were 7 years old? I did. I wanted to be a world champion.
Hey, is there honesty involved in this podcast? Can we be honest?
You can shut your fucking lips.
And then I'll just say, put them up, what? Let's go.
He's like, you look too pretty on the wave. Get ugly.
We can talk about DMT if you want.
I thought you were boxing.
All right, so we have the Matt Mayhem Biolos on the lineup. I feel like we should have Bad Brains playing you on or something. I'll get the music people on that. So thanks for joining us today, Matt.
Thank you.
How are you doing today? Where are you today? Who are you hanging with? What's been going on?
Today is, I don't know, pretty normal. I got up, tried to surf. It was windy and yucky, so went to work. Walked around the factory for 4 or 5 hours and then rushed home to do this.
I'm glad we pulled you away from the factory. And I was going to kind of ask, you know, the past, I don't know, God, it feels like a billion years. Let's just say 18 months, you know, COVID, global pandemic, somehow amidst all that chaos, the Pentagon agrees that there's UFOs, that they've been a thing for decades, and yet that's not the first thing that everyone's talking about, which is really spinning me out. But regardless, I thought we'd kind of start with the state of affairs on, you know, how has Mayhem Lost been doing? And actually, maybe for listeners, can you kind of explain the difference between those brands of Mayhem and Lost as it stands in 2021?
Yeah, I mean, as far as there really is no difference. It's kind of like how you would look at, say, Ralph Lauren and Polo. You know, Ralph Lauren, the designer, Polo's the brand. There's a lot of examples of that, but that's one that comes off the top. Basically, Mayhem is the shaper, the designer, and Lost is our brand. Yeah.
Cool. That makes sense.
So they go hand in hand. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I mean, all the reports and like conversations we've been having about the pandemic year of 2020.
Al Merrick and Channel Islands.
Makes total sense. He doesn't have a cool nickname though, so it's
No.
But I mean, even speaking of Channel Islands, but I mean, a lot of the board builders have been kind of reporting that they've cleared out all their stock, that it was their best year ever during the pandemic. Has it been similar for Lost?
Yeah. I mean, it was a strange start. We were closed for 7 weeks in the spring of 2020. I didn't think we need to be, but we were really worried, like everyone else, like what the hell's going on. But you know, I think building surfboards with all its hazards is actually a socially very safe endeavor. You know, we're all wearing masks and in our own rooms and gloves and you name it. But we were closed for 7 weeks. And then within a month, you know, when we reopened, a lot of the beaches were still closed around the country. But once things kind of rolled into summer of last year, it exploded. It was pretty much a global explosion. But I think talking to everyone that builds boards around the world, it's nowhere is it as big as the explosion that's been happening in California, as far as surfers and people buying surfboards and things like that. It's just crazy.
Yeah, I was talking to someone about that disruption last spring and the uncertainty, and they were saying, look, the last time in the board building community that something like this happened was when Clark Foam closed down. Do you agree with that?
That's not even 10% of this. The Clark Foam closure was a disruption and it was scary. We were actually fortunate. I had some containers of foam already coming in from other countries because I was exploring other options, mainly for performance and stuff. But, you know, that was a blip. That was literally such a blip. There was like a weird mad dash where everybody, you know, you sold like 40 boards in 2 days out of your shop.
Right.
But nothing like this. I would go as far as saying the last time there was a run on surfing popularity like this would be Gidget. You know, you can talk to Mickey Muniz and a few of the other old timers that are still cruising around here. They'll tell you this is like nothing like this has happened since Gidget. And it was similar then. Like Hobie was making 300 boards a week in the early 1960s, just all by hand, like 20 guys shaping surfboards by hand all day, every day. It was just crazy.
That's insane. So that's 60 years in between drinks on that kind of a phenomenon.
It's crazy that it's 60 years. Yeah.
So with your role, because it is so, you sit at this nexus point between so many different things, I'm curious as to how you go about your day or your week between things like designing and shaping surfboards, or working with team riders, or quality control on the public expression of the brand, social media personality, or running an actual business. I probably missed some things, but like kind of if you had to describe your work week, does that cover it? And if so,
that covers it. I would say that just about covers it. Quality control, not specifically just for the way the brand is managed, but the actual product is a big part,
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, my number one thing is designing a line of surfboards and designing specific custom surfboards for our customers.
Mm-hmm.
And then, that's probably the single biggest part of my business, my job. And then working with the pro surfers, the team riders and the athletes, and making sure they have everything they need anytime they need it. And then everything else, comes with it. It's running a business.
I mean, and like Lost Surfboards has such a robust team. And just a glance at social media, like it seems like you make time for literally everyone, from like your CT superstars to like little kids that are maybe just starting out on the program. Is that accurate, or do you kind of? I mean, I'm not trying to say that it's different.
I actually feel like we're tighter than most of our competitors. I mean, if you look at the competitors, it's pretty easy to pick 5 or 6 of the brands that are doing the most business. One of them, Firewire, probably has the leanest operation when it comes to marketing and team. They've chosen a different path and it's working for them well. But I would think, like, compared to some of the other brands out there, that we have a tighter team and we're a little more, I don't want to say elite, but we're like, I'm not down at the NSSA events chasing around the hot up and coming 10-year-olds. I mean, and especially with COVID in the last, like you said, 15, 18 months, we've used it as a time to kind of look at what the most strategic way to work with team riders is. And actually we've narrowed our team and we've tightened it up, and it's given me the ability to give more focus to the surfers who most want to work close with me and our brand, and do a better job for less surfers at the elite level, the mid-tier level, and then even with the kids. We've actually been tightening up. There's a skill there's a skill out there that kind of goes around in circles in business and in Hollywood even, or, actors and musicians. Learn to say no. At some point you got to learn to say no and turn away from some opportunities and do a better job with your current ones.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And we're going to talk about this season, and then I want to wind the clock back and then finish up here. But since we're talking about it, makes sense is, you taking a look at your team rider and what you said, your team riders and what you said about how you work with them. Does it differ between, someone like a competitive, like mega talent, like a Kolohe or a Griffin, versus like a free surfing talent, like a Mason Ho? Or do you find that there's maybe more similarities in how a shaper works with those surfers than people would assume?
From my experience, there's definitely a difference. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot less pressure on a Mason Ho or even an Ian Crane, for that matter, who's kind of got a foot in both worlds. But yeah, there's a lot of pressure with Carissa Moore, Kolohe, and the monsters that he has to deal with and face off with in a gunfight month after month. It's definitely a different experience. Mason will be like, brah, going to Indo, I need like 6 boards, and when it comes to the Hawaiian, he'll just be like, fun, make this, make that, let's try some crazy stuff. Then maybe when it comes to Hawaiian season, he gets a little more serious. He goes out and he looks through all his older boards, and he sends me board numbers and descriptions and what he wants. And he's pretty technical. He knows exactly what he wants, and he's picky, but there's definitely not that full arc of a year of just focus and stress and minimalistic microscopic details, which you get into with a technical surfer like Kolohe, who's such a professional in everything he does, just competing there in the top 10, in the top 5 year after year. It's a lot of pressure. It's more like watching that Formula One reality show, and Carissa's the same way. The younger surfers like Caroline, they kind of grow into that level of pickiness. The first couple of years with Caroline, it's like, sick. We're sick, and then slowly but surely they get a little more refined in their feedback.
I was gonna ask, is there do you guys talk about it back at the factory or wherever when someone does have that inflection point of like, geez, that kid was they didn't give a shit about what we gave them, really. They were just stoked all the time. And now they're like, I need 20 more of this. And like, you need to take a liter off of that or whatever. Like, do you guys talk about that when people kind of come into their own?
They do come into their own, and it's, but it's good. It's what separates the board builders that work with these elite surfers and the ones that don't. This is what we do that can separate us. It's not good or bad. It's just, it separates us. So it gives, if we're working with the pickiest surfers in the world and keeping them set up, then it means something to the customer who wants to order a custom board. He trusts in your designs. He trusts in your problem solving.
And a couple of those surfers you named, both, Kolohe and Mason, you've built boards that, like, they're second generation, Mayhem team riders in a lot of ways. And maybe that's actually a good way to pivot to kind of the genesis of Matt Biolos and Lost Surfboards. And I was reading about it. What was that? Sorry. Pivot time. That's right.
The Friends episode.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. But I was reading about you largely got introduced to the ocean. Your family had a boat in Dana Point Harbor, but you didn't actually come from San Clemente. Is that right?
No, I did not. I grew up inland, kind of bounced all around Orange County, started out in Anaheim, Westminster, ended up in Chino. My grandmother had a house on the bluff in Capo Beach most of my life. My aunt had a house in Dana Point. We couldn't afford property there, so to make my mom kind of happy and my dad's adventuresome, we bought a boat and got it in Dana Point Harbor. So we kind of stayed with the family that lived there, my grandparents. So kind of grew up basically spending 40 weekends and most of summer every year since 1980 in Dana Point Harbor. We still have the slip, still have a slip there, and Dana Point's been 40 years.
It's interesting because I hear this a lot, and I associate with it because I was the same. I didn't grow up at the beach, but did you feel like that when you were younger? Like you didn't actually come from the beach? Did you kind of have any bit of like an outsider approach?
Well, it never goes away, to tell you the truth. There's guys, my age or a little bit older. You see them at a bar still. I've been in San Clemente 35 years. You still didn't grow up here. I was like, okay, let me buy you a drink, But when I was early on, I moved full time. I spent every summer in high school in Dana Point and moved full time right when I finished. And the main thing is just, it's hard to believe with me, but keep your mouth shut and your head down and work, and slowly and surely get the respect of all the guys my age and the guys older, and just earn it. Just basically earn it. I showed up with no money and just grinded it out and worked my ass off, and you earn it.
Yeah, I was talking to someone similarly the other day because I started at Rip Curl Surf Center in San Clemente in 1998, and I came from inland too, Mission Viejo and San Juan, and it was kind of the same thing. They said, "Well, like, how'd you succeed?" And I mean, you succeed at a surf shop, but same thing. I thought, well, if I just do the work and I keep my mouth shut, and like that's valuable, that's kind of how maybe I can earn entry into this space that I really want to be a part of.
Just start out as showing. I mean, the people that are around you, the major dudes, showing them that I have a value. But at 17, I was, working at Herbie Fletcher's surf shop and doing ding repair on Christian and little 12-year-old Nathan's boards, and helping Dibby with her flamboyant art projects, and helping Herbie with anything that came up at any time. Like, I'll do it. I'll take it. I'll deal with the problem. I'll fix it. I'm on it. And then it turns into like being trusted and brought into the community. And I'm kind of ever indebted to the Fletchers for that. Then it just trickled out that, the Paskowitzes and Archibald and Dino, and just the whole. I just remember becoming really good friends with the younger McNulty brothers who were around my age, and just keep my mouth shut. Don't try and be something I'm not. Don't try and be like the hot shot ripper and be like Surf Bro. And just, I was the guy in the factory. I could take care of problems, whatever those might be.
It's funny because I'm sure you get asked this a lot as well, where people are like, well, how do I get my start, and how do I do this? And I always tell them the same thing, where it's like I don't think I would recommend doing what I did in terms of there wasn't really a formula, but it's the same thing. It's like if you're really passionate about something and you're kind and honest about it, and you're willing to work for free effectively just to get your foot in the door, it opens a lot of doors.
Yeah. Hard work solves a lot of problems. It's America, right?
Yeah. So your introduction to coastal life in Orange County, you kind of touched on. How did you get involved in board building? How did that start?
It wasn't that glamorous it wasn't like an epiphany I was I grew up in the harbor, and by the time I was an enterprising little guy, by the time I was 14, I was doing underwater boat maintenance. I'd drive around the harbor in my dad's inflatable with 2 tanks in the bow with 50 feet of hose, and I was cleaning boat bottoms, working for other guys who had like maybe 100, 200 boats a month that they maintained, and slowly started building up my own account base. I had like all my dad's friends and people that we knew personally in the harbor. Oh, Matt, you can be our guy. And I'd clean their boat bottoms and lick an envelope, put an invoice in, send them a little invoice in the mail, get my $30 a week later. Had that little business. Summers, I ended up starting working at the Dana Point shipyard, which is right there on the jetty at Doheny, right there at the boneyard. Working in the shipyard, started basically working and learning how to build boats. That was my path, was, apprenticing for shipwrights and stuff like that. And I had a friend who I surfed with, a Dana Point guy, who was making boards in his garage. And I was always kind of an artistic, kind of handy kid, way more than an athletic kid. And it looked fun. So I made I shaped a board for myself in his garage. And wow, he's like, yours looks better than mine. I've done like 20 already. And I was watching him glass the board, and I was talking to the shipwrights in the harbor, and they're like, oh, don't even mess with it. Take it. There's 5 factories around here. Take it to a surfboard factory. Have them help you do it. Have them do it. So I took it to Ronnie House at Surf Glass in San Juan, right by the coach house. And I walked in there, and I saw like all these busy guys building surfboards and hundreds of boards, Bill Stewart longboards, and all these amazing boards everywhere. And I was like, wow, this place looks amazing. And I go, do you guys need any help? And they said, yeah, can you polish or sand? I'm like, I polish boats. And they're like, you can use the broom and clean up. I never went back to the shipyard. I stayed at Surf Glass on and off for a few months. And one of the sanders there asked me if I wanted to help him sand at Herbie's shop / factory, which was Pacific Coast Fiberglass in the back of the surf shop where we still are. And I went there. It would have been like July of '87. And 34 years later, I'm still in that little factory building almost every day. Never left.
Well, you
Never
mentioned
left.
You mentioned you were an enterprising little guy. Did you have any other kind of like career path aspirations before, I guess, you got introduced to board building? Where you're like, well, I guess I'll just work in the boatyard. Maybe I'll do something else, or were you just kind of testing things out until you found it?
I knew that I was just going to kind of make a life like down there in that harbor, one way or the other. I probably had 35, 40 accounts. I was doing their boats. I could have grown that up, and and then you start hiring more guys to work for you, like a pool cleaner or a window guy. I was working at the shipyard. I figured that was my path. I didn't want to go to college. I kind of was cocky. Figured I was smart enough without college to do it myself. But, yeah. But I didn't. In the end, you skip forward a few years, and I partnered with Riola, who I always tell people he went to college for me. He got the degree for me.
You tick the box. Well, despite some of the I guess the people that were literally born on Camino Real down at the bar that claim you're not a local, you have been down there for decades and decades. I'm curious as to what you consider are the biggest changes in the Dana Point San Clemente community in the last since you started to now, and maybe some of the things that have always been the same.
Population's the biggest. Talega, it's a whole nother city. They didn't build a high school yet, but yeah, there's a whole nother city. So population's the biggest in development. Crowds. A lot of things have changed for the better. It's Disneyland. It's pretty safe and family friendly. The pier was kind of a gnarly place in the '80s. It was like, whoa. Now it's like Disneyland South. It's pretty safe and sane, like the fireworks slogan. But I don't know. It's a really simple answer. Population is just crazy. I think the biggest changes were from the generation before us, like with, Mickey Munoz and Phil Edwards and some of the old guys that are still around, or the changes they've lived through are the big ones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, being in sort of the same factory space area, community for 4 decades, going on 4 decades. Describe what it was like working with Herbie Fletcher, and I guess I've got 3 questions in one. When and how did the nickname Mayhem come in, and then how did you pivot to Mayhem Surfboards? Pivot again.
Well, I always had the name Mayhem for a couple of years before that. I grew up, going to punk rock shows a lot, and everybody had a punk rock band, and me and my friends had to have one. So they had one, and it was already called Mayhem Ordnance. And then I kind of ended up being the front man, and we played, a couple dozen house parties and Battle of the Bands type stuff. But basically, I took that moniker. They came up with it, and people started saying, "Oh, Matt and them, Mayhem, Matt Mayhem." And so I just figured, when I shaped a couple boards, it just seemed like a cool, instead of like Coastal Designs or like, California or Channel Islands, like everything was so like nice. And, I came from more of a punk rock background, not as a slang term, but just as like punk rock flyers was the kind of art I like, skulls and monster and just raw and rough and edgy and tear tape instead of pin lines, and just figured that was my thing. I just like, when I moved here, all the kids my age, local guys were into Grateful Dead and Stephen Still's latest solo album, except Christian. Christian was into the heavy stuff. And, I kind of brought this little bit of an outsider's kind of angry young edge. So that's where Mayhem. I just knew that was my motto. Plus, I wasn't known. I'm not going to put my name on a surfboard. I'm just like kind of chubby Jewish kid that just moved to town. I'm not going to Matt Biolos Surfboards. It was just Mayhem. Kind of something to hide behind. Like the Wizard of Oz or something. The awkward guy behind the green drape.
Well, but real quick, who are some of your bands back then?
What do you mean?
That you listened to?
Oh, I like 80s American hardcore punk. Adolescents, The Descendants, Agent Orange. I mean, the list goes on forever and ever. All the Oxnard bands. I grew up listening, Ill Repute, Aggression, obviously Bad Brains back east, the DC bands, Minor Threat, 7 Seconds, the straight edge vibe, there's all those bands, early to mid 80s American hardcore, Dead Kennedys, it's kind of where Black Flag, Circle Jerks, you name it, that whole era.
It's just interesting because an
American punk album from 1981 to 1986, 87, that was all about it. That was me.
Yeah, I just think it's really cool, right? Because that was obviously a very genuine part of your identity, and you imbued kind of everything you did, surfboard wise and brand building wise with that. And it really stands out. Like, it's, as you said, it was a departure from a lot of the other stuff that was happening at the time, but it's almost irreplicable, like, because there wasn't really that many other people that lived that way.
Yeah, I'm not saying I was some hardcore guy. I was still
you can say it,
suburban kid. We had a pleasure boat in Dana Point Harbor. But I definitely identified with these bands and their messages and the do-it-yourself. And I identified with the political guys like Dead Kennedys, or the straight edge guys like Minor Threat, or the party madmen or the derelicts like DI, Orange County's Best, and Adolescents. So I just like it. I like the aggression, the speed. I love the do-it-yourself. Those kind of bands and those kids making records and producing, distributing, doing it all themselves, that do-it-yourself, it influenced me. It showed me that I can do it. And maybe you can do it with surfboards. You can do it with clothing. You can do it with a window cleaning business. You can just start something and do it yourself and not have to answer to other people.
All right, so let's talk about how you started something and did it yourself. Your own board label coming out. I imagine it came out of the incubation chamber that was Herbie Fletcher Surfboards. Explain to us how that happened.
I work at, you work at the factory, you're doing odd jobs, you're learning to sand, you're putting in fin boxes or, longboard fin boxes, you're painting, And at night, you stay late, and then the shaping room opens up and you go in and shape. And being there in the Fletcher compound, which was actually run by two guys, Jim Nudo and Tom Sutherland, both of which are still involved in our business. Jimmy's like 69. He's our glass factories manager. And Suds, who really taught me a lot of the artisanal stuff, Tom Sutherland, he's like 67, and he's our full-time airbrushers to this day. You're there with these guys. Herbie's running in and out, and he's bringing all the legends and surf stars by. So summer of '88, Mike Hinson pulled up with some gypsy chick and lived in a motorhome in our parking lot for 2 months. So at night, he's in there shaping, and I'm just done with my work, sitting in the corner of the room, bothering him, listening to him, and watching him shape. And then, 3 months later, Reno's in town for a couple months, Reno Abalera, and he's shaping, and he's like standing there talking to me, watching me learn how to shape, telling me like, do this, do that. And next thing you know, like it was just a steady procession of like iconic, legendary, and up and coming. Archie's there, they're my age, Christian, that whole thing happening. So it's just, you're there doing your grunt work, but assimilating all this amazing things that's happening around you, and then putting in the extra hours, hand shaping 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 boards a week, 8 boards a week, 12 boards a week, with the kind of guys that I surf with who are willing to give me, $250 and trust me to make them a board. And slowly but surely, year after year, a higher level customer / surfer starts trusting you to make them a board. Mm-hmm. And that's just kind of how it worked for me. I always padded it by working, but the only way to be in the middle of all that was to actually have a job and be there working for other people, not just shaping a board in my garage, sending it to some really good glasser, paying them $250 for a beautiful resin tint, and then putting it on Instagram.
Right.
You couldn't, that wasn't the way you did it back then.
It's interesting you kind of bring up that as a comparison too, because I don't really even know what the numbers would be, but again, it goes back to kind of the staying power thing. It feels like Mayhem Surfboards, because of the work that you put in, or the pedigree of building boards and the people and the conversations that you had and the feedback you got from the team riders, has a kind of depth and staying power that, I'm sure there's people that pop up on Instagram that got pretty boards and whatever, but it doesn't feel like it feels like that's very temporal by comparison. Do you agree? Or
yeah, it's also you're either, unless you can make a sustainable business, and I don't mean like eco-sustainable, but sustainable like year after year, where you can move forward in life, then you're going to lose interest usually and try and find another way to make a living. But it's just the same in so many businesses or places where you build a brand or a notoriety for a person. It's easier to stay in the game than to get in the game. So once you're there, it's a lot easier to just stay there. Les Shaw, the owner of WRV in Virginia Beach, said something really cool to me once, and he's always got these crazy cryptic one-liners. He's just like, Lost, man, I used to go shape there in the early to mid 90s, and we still do partner projects. He's like, yeah, like Jim from Taxi, and he'd be like, you made it, you got in, you're in, don't fuck it up. And then just kind of walks away, and you're like, okay. But simple little thing, you do all the hard work, you get to a position where you're stable, and then it's a lot easier to stay there than to get there. It's like being ranked 34th on the WCT. That's the hardest place to go up from. When you're in the top 5, you're surfing against those lower seeds, and it's easier to stay there than to get there.
I like that take. We're going to take a quick break to get a word in from our sponsors, and when we come back, we're going to hit a few more topics. You mentioned Mike Riola before, who, when I was growing up, which was when I got into surfing, I guess it was sort of mid 90s, felt like a pretty big presence in my like tiny surfing life. But I think he's kind of, and I might be reading this wrong, but sort of drifted more in towards the background. For listeners who are uninitiated with Mike Riola, can you explain who he is and how you guys met, and maybe try to put a birth date around the brand that you guys ultimately built?
Yeah, Mike's from Florida originally. He he grew up in the west coast of Florida, kind of in and out with the Lopez family. You know, knew Shay and Cory when they were really little, and he was probably in high school, a couple of years older. But Mike, I was living in a kind of a crash pad, like a kid's house, an apartment down by San Clemente Pier with like 3 or 4 or 5 other guys, whatever. And I met Mike as he was probably going through, he was a Gator. He went to the University of Florida. He'd come out and he'd basically crash on the couch all summer long. I think he was even there the summer before I moved into that apartment. And then so I moved in, and then, my buddy's like, oh, by the way, my friend from Florida's coming out. He's going to be on the couch. And he was pocketing all the money that Mike would pay. None of us got a break on the rent, but that guy did. And so Mike spent like 3 or 4 summers, just living, couch crashing, working his way through business school, and basically hanging out at the pier all day. Like maybe he'd go down to Lowers a little bit too, but he was just in deep at the pier and 204s and just kind of surfing. He'd just squeak into nationals a couple times, maybe, loved surfing, focused on trying to be a good surfer, but not in a professional manner anyway. So he kind of sat quietly, and each summer he'd probably saw me, evolving and growing and kind of getting better. First at the art I was putting on boards, and then shaping, and kind of, we became friends. We started doing things together. When he was about to finish school, there was a couple other local friends of ours, Chad and Aaron, who had kind of convinced me to start putting some of the art I was doing on surfboards onto T-shirts. And they go, oh, we'll handle everything. Just you do the art, and we can scribble Lost on it, like Lost, and we'll help you do it. And I'm like, okay, let's do it.
Did you ask, like, why are we putting Lost on the T-shirts? Like,
no, they're like, because I guess I skip it, but basically I was already scribbling Lost on the surfboards. I was calling my shapes Mayhem. It was Mayhem surfboards, but I'd tag them with this little tag, Lost. And a certain group of kids around Strands and Dana Point and a little bit of San Clemente and even Salt Creek were kind of catching on to it. Like, oh, this is cool. This guy's, what is this Lost? Team Lost. We're not cool. It's just Lost. We don't try to win. We're just having fun. They kind of caught on to it. This group of kids, maybe there's 20 or 30 of them, kids that I was actually shaping boards for. Now you got to understand, now it's late 80s, 1990, 89, 90, 91. And I'm actually making 15, 20 boards a week, 12, 15 boards a week, and not needing to really work the grunt work as much anymore around the factory, sustaining myself, cash in pocket, make $100, put it in my pocket, go to the bar, blow it. Next day, someone else orders a board. Oh, got another $100. Here we go. So we started doing a couple T-shirts, and Mike's like, look, I'm done with school. If you really want to make this happen, I can help. I'm watching what you're doing. And this is why I went to school. I grew up on the surf business. I loved surf magazines, surf culture. If you really want to do it, you and we can do it. And he kind of came in with me and the other guys, and we ran around the first year or so and tried to do a few things and almost gave up for a while. And then another year later, we started out again, but it was just Mike and I. And that's why you get our slogan since 91 or 93.
It's debatable.
It's debatable. Yeah. And it was basically Mayhem shapes, and we were doing Lost T-shirts, those early 90s. And it took a couple of years for us to kind of combine the two and just go, oh, Lost Surfboards.
It also feels like it coincided at such an interesting time in terms of performance surfing. And I wanted to get your thoughts on that too, because you named a couple of the talents that I'd imagine we're getting boards from you with, Cory and Shay and a few others, and that hotbed of talent in San Clemente in the mid 90s that was surfing a particular way and certainly marketed and branded in a way that was in line with that outsider, do-it-yourself punk rock aesthetic that proved kind of like a counterpoint to the momentum generation in a lot of ways. Is that fair to kind of say that?
Yeah, it's really fair. Yeah, for sure. It took a few years, I was around maybe 94 when maybe 93 or 94 when Momentum came out, and we had grown up and been right there when Herbie was making Herbie was the guy before that doing all his Wave Warriors. So we were like loyal to him, and and we were like Mike had the idea once he saw Momentum and even Momentum 2, this is a way that we can tell our story through this medium, VHS, and just film the life around us and what's going on. But, Mike was the one that had the eye for really brand building, in those early years. He's spending time at the pier. He's kind of basically discovered Ward, like Ward was already like on Rusty and had Andy Fomenko helping him along. But Mike was like, that's the key, a kid like that. And then Cory wanted to be involved because he wanted to surf with Ward because Ward, he recognized that. And things just started to slowly escalate and happen. But, I was primarily focused on, learning my craft. And Mike had most of big ideas and vision in the early years, for sure.
Did you have kind of guys from the older generation, your Fletchers and Archbolds and guys like that were getting boards from you at this time? Or are you primarily kind of focused on, the Lopez Brothers and
I started making boards I made my few boards for Nathan in probably the late 80s. Mm-hmm. He was like the first, he was cool. Nathan was like, we'd go skate together and we were friends. And then not long after Christian, maybe a year later, but Christian and Nathan, I was making them boards by 88, 89, maybe in 89. I don't know. I never really made boards for Archie. I used to paint quivers for him, but he was always Timmy's guy. And, we were friends. We had a lot of antics together, but I never worked with him. But Strider, Strider was there winter of 91, shaped him some guns by hand, he still has that claim, first team rider.
It's one of his many claims for sure. He's certainly Bay Street's finest.
But this is a fact. I mean, that's 30 years him and I have been bouncing around together. It's quite a number.
Go on. Sorry.
But yeah, I mean, basically, we was involved with those guys who were my age and maybe a little older, Dino, but we didn't. But really, when it finally turned into Matt as a shaper working with hot surfers, it was Chris first and foremost, then Cory, and then once you're working with those guys, then you have to learn how to say no because everyone kind of wanted to be a part of it.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
I read somewhere that you got hooked on surfing in a major way because of competitive surfing. Yeah, it's a story kind of about, the OP Pro and going up there and checking it out, watching Shane Horan. Can you give us a bit of background into that story? And then
I just remember in the summer of 82, I had one of my best friends, his family was like split between next door to me where I grew up, and they had in Huntington Beach, like up by Golden West. His dad worked in the oil fields and had a home there. So, and he got his license, Paul Burton. He actually glasses boards for us to this day. We're still friends, and he's he glasses boards for us. He got his license. I was like, he was just turning 16. I was just turning 13. It would have been summer of 82, and we boogie boarded. We started boogie boarding. That was, it probably lasted from when school got out in the middle of June until we went to the OP Pro, and I saw Shane Horan do the 360 or whatever it was in the shore break, and we were like, we're never riding fucking boogie boards again. We're getting surfboards. That's it. He's like, we're getting surfboards. We're surfing. Fuck this. And we went and got surfboards, and that late that summer, I was crudely attempting and learning how to surf. I was like, that's it. We're surfing. But we were there just like typical Southern California vermin, like that was the place to be, walking up and down Main Street, standing there on the beach at the OP Pro, bikini girls, Shane Horan, you name it, whatever, whoever was in the final with him, I don't remember.
I bring it up because, like it's something that we talk about at work all the time until I feel like I talk about it till I'm blue in the face. But, surfing likening itself to having anti-establishment roots and iconoclastic roots and progressive nonconformist roots. And then competitive surfing within the surfing world having this paradox of being the establishment in an anti-establishment community. And Lost and Mayhem kind of as brands and the people that were expressing that brand's perspective could have very, very easily and probably have effectively marketed themselves and positioned themselves as non-competitive anti-heroes. But that just kind of was never the reality because you were building high performance boards, and the surfing that the Team Riders was doing was world class.
I think we were
and
just painting. We were painting a real picture. I mean, just because you're a competitive surfer doesn't mean you don't party. And it's getting more and more difficult to live both things. But Gabriel Medina runs around like a madman and has fun. And it's just weird. I think what people think about Lost is we showed kind of a little bit more of all that. But yeah, I was definitely. It took. I literally didn't even boogie board until June of '82, right when I got out of school at 13. I'd already been lingering around that harbor, sailing, fishing, boating, blah, 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 for 3 years. But my mom just said, you're bugging me. Go over, walk over to Doheny and play in the waves or something. But, and that lasted a couple months. But then once we saw those pro surfers and everybody screaming and cheering, and I never really thought about it that way, but yeah, pro surfing is kind of what it took to go, oh, wait, I'm doing the wrong thing. I need to stand up on a real board and do this. It didn't take long, but it took that craziness of Huntington to do it. But as far as, go ahead.
No, you go. Keep going.
But as far as those, I think we were just, when you don't have anything, you have to be anti something, It's like, it's socially, it's politically, it's business. It's, we didn't have anything. So they say, what are you angry about, Johnny? Or what are you rebelling against? And Johnny says, what do you got? So we're going to use our weapons, our anger, our angst, our frustrations, and down and dirty to fight a war, against the establishment, whether that's, the surf industry at the time or Taylor Steele or whatever it is, the momentum generation. What do we have? We can't fight toe to toe in their battle. So we used our wits and we used what we had, and we told our story, our version, and we felt that was real. Even though if you're a kid that surfs contests, and even if you're Strider and you're getting paid by Quicksilver now and living the dream, you're still running around with fucking Randall and Chicken Willie and partying and going crazy, trying to drag girls back to the house and have a little fun.
Well, it's interesting, right? Because I feel like so much has changed since you guys probably started, right? But when you talk about saying we want to push our perspective and we want to fight a war, a war requires at least a singular battlefield, right? So as you said, whether it's in the video space or the competitive space, you've got your troops and they have their philosophy and they're going to go out there and they're going to battle, someone on the other side of the fence, as opposed to what it can be now, right? Which is sort of isolationism, right?
We were battling to get into surf shops and sell videos and sell T-shirts and sell surfboards. Yeah, we were battling against massive marketing machines. We were battling against, video manufacturers like Jack McCoy, who had Billabong behind him, or the amazing Rip Curl movies of the era, or Taylor Steele, who had all the best, established best surfers. And we were battling to sell a few T-shirts to surf shops against Quicksilver and blah, 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 all the brands, and I was battling to get a few surfboards in the racks against whatever the brands were at the time. So we knew we had to make noise and do things differently.
Yeah, differently.
With no budget.
But it's funny
no driver's license.
But it's funny how often that works, right? Because differently to you or differently to the world was just authentic for you, which was raw and unpolished. And as you said, the videos were very cinema verite, and in a lot of ways, we're forerunners to CKY, Jackass, everything, right? Because this is just sort of normal people doing extraordinary things.
Yeah, nothing normal about Chris Ward. He's extraordinary.
That's fair. That's fair. Yeah. So we touched on your growth in building kind of high performance championship tour caliber surfboards. But one of you're arguably credited, and fairly credited, I think, with sort of the modern renaissance of high performance alternative craft. And my personal story for this is I didn't come from a surfing family. I grew up, as I said, Mission Viejo, San Juan. I used to take OC Transit Authority to San Clemente Pier. That's where I surfed for
91. Was that the 91 bus?
Yeah, probably. Picked up at La Paz Carl's Jr. Took 90 minutes to get to outside of Casanos, but it's great. I have no regrets. But I remember out of nowhere, and like my family didn't surf or anything, my mom got me the VHS of 5.5 by 19 1/4 when it came out and wore the thing out. And that movie, and I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, transformed surfing for me, but I think for the entire surfing world. So I'm not going to do it justice by explaining it, but can you break down the film, where it came from, 5.5 by 19 1/4, and the boards and the team riders that really made it happen?
Well, it's 25 years. Next year will be 25 years. It came out in 97. Basically, it's pretty easy, and I've explained it many times to many different people in different formats. But we're going along making boards. We had Cory and Chris kind of on the program, and Chris saw there was little tiny inklings, like Kern on a borrowed knee board surfing like in Montauk or something. It's like 2 waves. Remember we were hanging out with like it came out as like a blip in some Rip Curl movie, and then there was Kern. Chris was on the North Shore. It was like, I don't know, 94 or 95. And he calls me, and it was like early season, like October. And he calls me and he goes, "Hey, Tom Curran surfing log cabins on a fish." And I'm like, "What's a fish?" He goes, "It's a fish. It's a little fish, swallowtail." I'm like, "Okay." He goes, "Can you make me one? I want one. I want a fish." So I literally went to Brian Clark's surf shop, BC Surf Shop. It used to be in downtown San Clemente. Looked on the wall. I knew there was a bunch of twin fins on the wall. And I looked on the wall, and there's just all these twin fins, late 70s, early 80s era. Basically, they all look like an MR, with all the Stussies and all the brand, Schroff. They all look like MRs. The boards Mark rode to his world titles. And kind of just took a gander at them, maybe got a couple in my hand, and went back and made Chris this little stubby 5.5 swallowtail with kind of a wide pointy nose but I just laid the template on, and I ended up making the tail like 14 inches wide. It's really narrow. So he went out and he came home, and then I remember we took him back to LAX to go back around Thanksgiving with that board. And he's like, "Oh, it's amazing. Does anything I want. I can ride 6-foot waves on it. I can ride 2-foot waves on it." And I think the key then and now was I didn't make a San Diego Steve-less kneeboard type fish, or it was with the big 18-inch tail and keel fins or any of that. I just made a short, wide little swallowtail. And Cory wanted one, and then we got this my friend Andy from Kauai, he wants one. And all of a sudden, the first 5 fish I ever make are for Chris Ward, Cory Lopez, Andy Irons, etc. And then Drew Todd, who lives here in San Clemente, he was kind of working for us filming, or just filming in general, was basically there and kind of documented a lot of it. We filmed a bunch of them surfing around San Clemente. Then there's a decent amount of clips in what's really going wrong and on of those guys surfing in like 94, 95, 96 on these fish. But that next winter, they went over ready with a bunch of boards, and Andy had boards, and Drew was with them, and they filmed like that 96, 97 winter. And then it was Drew's idea, "Hey, let's take all this footage. Let's just make a movie. We have enough footage to make a whole movie just with the fish." And him and Mike did most of the work, and I had my fun picking most of the songs. Drew's really good with music as well. And we made the movie. We didn't really think that much of it. We didn't think it would resonate like it did, but it basically, it helped us a lot. It became something.
I've talked to a bunch of folks about, at that time period, the Andy and Bruce thing, and how obviously the attention was primarily on Bruce when they were younger, and everyone, like the majority of people, I'm interested to get your take on it, but we're like, yeah, Andy's really good, but Bruce is the guy. When you were building boards for, I presume both of them, but Andy in particular, do you remember the first time you kind of saw something in him where you're like, "Oh, this guy surfs different"?
Yeah, this kid Hopper, Shannon Eichstead, he's a Florida guy who spends most of his time in mainland Mexico surfing huge barrels. But kind of a funny character. He's the one that introduced me to the irons and said, "Oh, we want to get these guys some boards," and we just made him some potato chip ripsticks. Probably 95 or 6, I don't know. And then there was really a lot harder to see people back then. There was no, you didn't go online and check all their clips and see if they were good. There was nowhere, nothing to see until they made. So first time I would have seen those kids would have been when they came out for like nationals at Lowers or something. Bruce ended up winning nationals on a board I made him in 97 that same year. No, I'm sorry, 96. So maybe Andy won it the year before that. But I still have the board that Bruce won on. Maybe I don't remember the details that much. I don't remember if either one of them had more or less, but it's a long time ago. I don't know.
It's been 4 decades, man. That's a lot. That's a lot of boards you built. Do you think you have a count for the amount of boards you built?
No.
Where it's like
it's hard to count. In the olden days, where you have like a Terry Martin who worked for Hobie and all these other brands, and every day he just got up and shaped 10 surfboards. Oh, I've shaped 10,000 boards, or I've shaped 100,000 boards. Or, nowadays it's like we're a brand. We make 4,000 boards a year in Australia, and how do you count those? Do you count the boards we've been making at the Pucas factory in Spain every year for 25 years? I design surfboards to the best of my ability, working with super good surfers and people like myself and other average surfers to make sure that our needs are covered. And then we design them and we get everything dialed, and we use, highly skilled, guys to build them and sell them around the world. Try and build most of them where they're surfed, Brazil, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, Indonesia, build boards, California, Hawaii, Florida, build boards.
We were talking about Andy, who sadly, passed away from an overdose in 2010. Chris Ward, who's had domestic violence issues, and I wonder what your thoughts are on the brand building of Lost. Was it chicken and egg in terms of responsibility? Were you capturing the way people really were, and showcasing that to people, or do you ever think about, man, we should have made different decisions? And I don't have an opinion on it. I'm just asking.
Well, I go to bed at night feeling just fine with myself. I know what Chris Ward was doing before he was with us. I know what Chris Ward was doing when he was with us. I know that when he had certain things happen when he was a young man as a teenager, myself and his manager, Flamenco, and Mike, and all of us around us would do everything we could to show him the right way to do things. I think that we gave him way better personal attention than the big corporate brands that preyed on him before and after us. It's primarily after, not Rusty, but after us. And Andy, honestly, most of my time with Andy was during the MCD era. And after that, I was barely see the guy and didn't work with him very much. And I was aware of his mental kind of some of his things that were covered in the movie, like he would get kind of manic depressive, like up and down to ask me personally, I don't think that anything I did or Mike did or with our movies or anything, I don't think that we never goaded anyone. We never pushed anyone, and we never really celebrated top level surfers doing anything illegal or bad. I mean, the only time that Chris Ward was ever shown with drugs in one of our movies, he was vacuuming up Randall's Mexican pot, like, no, that's bad for you. And he vacuumed it up with his shop vac. So I don't know.
I mean, when you look at, this is sort of unrelated, but just on the Chris Ward point, his surfing, I just, before all of that, as a talent, as a teenager, people say they've never seen anyone like him.
Well, yeah, he's a talented guy. He's was a massive part of any of our perceived success in our life, in our business. And he's a great guy. We took him to Lemoore to surf the wave pool a couple months ago. He hadn't surfed a wave pool since Typhoon Lagoon 20 years earlier. It's like, I haven't surfed a wave pool since the 90s, since Typhoon Lagoon. And we took him up there, and he brought CJ, and he was getting barreled with his son on like a 6'6" shortboard, not on some big 9-foot tandem board. But they were on like a 6'8" rocket or something that we grabbed him out of the warehouse, like getting barreled with the kid. It was amazing.
We're going to get to a couple more topics, and we've got some listener questions for you, but we're going to take one more quick break to get a word in from our sponsors. We've talked a lot about sort of the nascent years of the Lost and Mayhem brands, which were 90s. It felt like a perceivable shift in not only the way the brand was portrayed, but operations, successes, after the millennia, mid to late aughties, and certainly through the 2010s. What was that like for you personally as sort of shaper founder of the company?
Well, the part that gets kind of skipped over is around 2000, 99 to 2000, we really got serious about apparel. We did a license deal with this big company, La Jolla, who also had O'Neill. And part of the deal was we worked for the company. We had salaries. Mike and I, we ran merchant. I was really focused on graphic merchandising and marketing, and Mike was on the rest of marketing, team and the big picture of marketing. And the surfboards kind of ran cruise control. I mean, I was putting, 25 hours a week into surfboards and another 30 hours. I mean, it's just, the numbers don't even add up, but we were running a clothing business, like full pedal to the metal, and trying to do the surfboard still, and even got our first dabble into retail with the Catalyst stores. But from 2000 to say 2010, we had that license with the La Jolla group doing Lost Apparel, and started doing like significant numbers, significant volume. The surfboards just kind of cruised along with it. There was actually a time when the attention and momentum and growth and publicity and marketing dollars energy that was being put into the apparel was actually pulling the surfboards along with it, while I might not have been that singularly focused. I wasn't doing that great a job. I just really only worked with the team that actually wore clothes and boards. So I wasn't doing like what I was doing in the 90s and kind of making boards for all the QS kids and stuff. But it just ended up, I was only shaping if you wore the clothes and rode the boards and you were part of our program. And we made a significant amount of money, and we had a significant amount of success. And I was just ground down. This is most of my 30s, ground down. Should have been surfing. I was working. We made a couple amazing surf movies in that era. We made 5'5" Redux and Ward Stories around 2008, 2009. They're, I think, some of the best movies we ever made. But then basically with the GFC, the global financial crisis, the meltdown, the clothing industry really went down, and we lost our license. And at that point, we basically lost our income. And I was like, oh, wow, how are we going to do this? And Mike's like, oh, we can make money on our surfboards. We got a great surfboard brand. Just got to refocus. Right about that time, Kolohe and Andino is, 13 years old, 14 years old. And he's starting to happen. I was already making him boards, but he starts becoming Kolohe. And I just start spending more and more time in the factory again, like around, like you said, I don't know what you call it, but around 2010, and really started getting more and more focused on the surfboards again, working with good surfers. The Taj Burrow thing kind of started to happen, and Carissa more, like hanging out at the beach, and my relationships with Ken Worthy at Nike, and all these things kind of started happening where it was almost like 1996, 97 all over again. Except this time, we just had a 10, 12-year run of learning how to run a business and how to deal with a business and how to do things like grown up, So we took all that experience and all that success and all that heartbreak and all the tears that we learned in those years, and sort of just really put it back into surfboards. And now this has been like 10, 11 years since that. And that's where as an outsider, you would really see another push of, Mayhem Lost again, like what happened in the mid to late 90s.
Yeah, totally.
We were forced to. We had to.
Well, and I feel like something that goes unrecognized, probably not by you or by people at the company, but was like for several years, Mayhem Surfboards had a controlling interest and command amongst the world's best women surfers. You mentioned Carissa, but like Kolohe and Malia Manuel and eventually Tyler Wright, like you guys really had a huge, strong base on the women's tour. And I always felt like that was sort of something that was unsung.
Yeah, it was a little too much at one point, and some of the girls became disenchanted. I couldn't be everything for everyone. But yeah, at one point it was Carissa, Tyler, between the two of them, 6 world titles together that we did. Coco, of course, and her run, and Coco and I are working together right now to make an assault on that QS this fall, and she's the wild card in your guys' event in a couple weeks. So working hard with her still. But it was like, yeah, Coco, Carissa, Tyler, Malia Manuel came on. We had a good run with her, and then gosh, I can't even think, but Macy Callahan. And then at a certain point, I think I almost blame Caroline a little. God bless her. She's so amazing. But all of a sudden this little rocket pops up, Caroline. And all of a sudden my focus is, dithered even more. And I think that some of the girls around the perimeter were just like, hey, maybe we should go where we feel we can get more focused attention. And fair to them, Macy, Malia, and Tyler all decided to leave on their own terms. And Tyler and I were the closest. He was the closest with myself and my family. And I think we were some of the first people that really socialized closely with her and her girlfriend at the time, and had really good times with them as human beings. But I think that I learned from that. And since then, we're kind of even like making hard decisions and learning to say no. And like, okay, we don't need to have the biggest goddamn surfboard team on earth, because there's diminishing returns. And when you spread your focus too thin, you can't be everything for everyone. And we got to focus on what we can do best for the people who really want to work close with us. So those girls are going to do their own thing, and they're going to have success. And we're going to continue doing what we do and work with the girls we're with now.
It's a real thing, both for the women and the men, though, right? Like when you have multiple team riders, like I guarantee it, they're in the locker room looking at someone else's boards being like, I think Matt spent like more time on these than mine, even though it's like, it might be total bullshit, but for sure that happens.
Yeah. We had an infrastructure set up. I mean, Tyler won one of her world titles, 7 of the 10 events on boards that were made by our team in Australia. Mm-hmm. She was working close with them. She had our Australian factory a while away. Now she's riding basically Australian Pizels, which ironically is the same company. But John and we have the same company in Australia. So she just basically, the way she found me, she targeted me like when she was young and said, hey, I'm going to come to California. I want to hang out with you. I want to start making some boards. And I think together we can do something amazing. This is well before she started winning contests and world titles. And she came to Mammoth, her and her brother Mikey. We took them snowboarding, mountain biking, had fun, surfed T Street, made boards, and we had an amazing run together. And I think that she went through such a tumultuous time in her life the last couple of years. She called me. She goes, hey, you know what? I'm doing it again. I'm gonna go and I'm gonna blaze my own path. I'm gonna make a change. And she did it again. God bless her.
It makes sense. I mean, and on the men's side, like Mayhems have always been pretty well represented. I remember the Taj thing just being like a nuclear bomb going off, and that just felt like such a great partnership for that point in his career, and he won so many events on Mayhems. Now you have a very solid team anchored, as you pointed, on Kolohe Andino, who's coming back from injury. But in the last couple of years, fellow San Clementian Griffin Colapinto has made such an impact on tour. I'm wondering, and I've always wondered, actually I had lunch with Kolohe a couple of weeks ago, I should have asked him, but if there's ever been like a little bit of brother looking over his shoulder and being like, oh shoot, like I'm supposed to be winning world titles and winning CT events, and now I've got Griffin kind of on my corner here.
I think we all think it's good. It's good for him. Kolohe he's a man. He's a big boy. He's a commander of his universe, and he's been very successful in so many ways in so many parts of his life that, he's still the boss. He's the number one guy. He's one of Griffin's idols, and him keeping Griffin really close and being, really good friends and surfing and traveling together. It's a good thing for Kolohe. He knows it. Griffin knows it. And it's a team, it's like Formula One. You got two guys on that team working together. And we're really, really stoked with working with Yago Dora and his father and their whole program. It's just beautiful, beautiful surfing, really high level. They're really professional and calm and great people to work with. So those are our men right now on the CT that we work with. And I think that it's, I've had years where I'm shaping boards for 6-7 guys on the CT, and that's where, you start getting some chinks in the armor. There's problems. It's really hard to do that. So right now, I think in the surfboard business is so diverse. It's, you can't just market hot surfing on bump squash shortboards. And there's so much more to being a successful surfboard brand and than just, bludgeoning people with, look how hard this guy rips on my boards. There's so much more to it than that. And I need to have headspace and time to do more diverse things with our boards and our brand.
Makes sense. If you had to bet a round of drinks with the locals at the bar on which of your men is going to win a CT event first, which one are you going with, Kolohe, Griffin, or Yago?
It's really bitching is I don't have to answer that question.
You don't have to do anything, actually.
I don't. Yeah.
Well, you talked about going up to the surf.
I like first come, first serve.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
You mentioned taking the crew up to Surf Ranch a couple weeks ago. What are your thoughts on that wave? I presume you've had a chance to surf it, and the events are there.
I love the wave. For myself, I love it. I've been a couple times, probably ridden 15, 18 waves. It's a blast. I think it's absolutely part of the surf world, and it should be represented in the contest world because it's part of the surfing world right now. It's part of the universe. And if you want to be the best surfer in the universe, I think it's a box you have to tick. So I think it has its place. I think one event's correct. I think to go into details, obviously Waco is a couple of days in Waco is one of the funnest things in the world to do with your friends and family. It's just unbelievable. I'm a Waco addict. I've been 4 times now since COVID. I probably went 4 times before that. So we love it. But it's not a world-class wave to have a CT event by any means. A 15, 18 second Waco could be. I think to get nitpicky, I think the Lemur wave is a little long. I think it kind of tends to breed conservatism in the surfing. I think that, and then they do a right and a left back to back, so they're really fatigued. And I don't know how much, surfing's not a marathon or a triathlon. We're not really judging guys on being able to surf, a minute and 50 seconds, with a break in between. Yeah. So I think it's it leans itself a little bit that way. I look at that wave and I just think I'd love to see that wave be like 25 seconds long instead of 45 or whatever it is.
Yeah. Increase the frequency and
the frequency and give the guys more waves and cut them loose more and feel more like they can really go for it. That said, the cream rise of the crop, and you look at the way Medina surfs it and the way Griffin and Toledo surf the right. And, there's some, guys are cutting loose and doing really progressive stuff on it. But in a perfect world, I think it would be better if it was a little shorter and give the surfers more chances to really go for it.
Yeah. Do you change the way you build boards for that kind of a system compared to the ocean?
We haven't, not like gross radical changes, no more than a different board for Sunset than Pipeline, or a different board for Trestles to Margaret's. Yeah, it's a different board, it's a different wave, but it's not like radically different.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So the big lightning rod for discussion for this year's season is the Rip Curl WSL Finals at lower trestles. For listeners who are uninitiated, for the first time in history, we're going to be taking the top 5 men, top 5 women to lower trestles for a one-day event where they will compete for the world title on the day. What are your unvarnished thoughts on this? I'd argue probably the most significant departure in how we crown world champions ever.
I don't like it. I don't like it. Like everyone else, I'm going to suck it up and live with it. I could argue my reasons. They're probably the same as everybody else's reasons that don't like it. I do love the terraced way it's going to be run. Not terrorist, but terrace, where like number 5 goes against number 4, number 4 goes against number 3, or the winner goes against 3, the winner goes against 2. I mean, that takes away some of the sting. But being at trestles, I mean, I'm a trestles guy. It's my home break. Surfing there 40 years, 39. But I think trestles, maybe it would be easier to sell me on it if it was a really consequential wave, like they say Chopu or Pipeline. I just think you got to have some respect for history. And I think the finals at Pipeline is always the best way to do it. But then again, you want to see, it's great to see all these other guys able to surf Pipeline. And I want to see the whole WCT surf Pipeline because there's so many amazing pipe surfers in that top 44. So then it's easy to argue all the ins and outs. But personally, I think surfing as a global sport and the WSL, their mantra for all these years, which you're probably not saying it anymore because it's bullshit now, is it takes a tour to crown a champ. It's like, or whatever that slogan was for all these last years. It's just, no, it doesn't. All you got to do is cruise along and make the final 5. And I don't know. I just think it would be a great travesty if number 5, after the season Medina's putting together, comes in and gets hot and becomes the world champ. Because all of us core guys, meaning the surfers on tour and the shapers and the diehard fans, a lot of us are just going to be like, it's an asterisk, and I personally, I don't think it's going to last.
We'll see.
I don't think it'll last.
It's definitely going to happen for the next 3 years.
Fair enough.
But I've told this story on the podcast before. I was sort of a big doubting Thomas in the beginning, and I worried about pretty much the same thing, which was legitimacy. And I could tell this story and people will be like, whatever, you get paid by the fucking WSL, it doesn't matter. But, we had this meeting in Fiji a few years ago where we brought all the world champs that were then on tour, men's and women's, and we brought all the people that had kind of finished like 2nd and 3rd for the last few years. And we said, look, we want to develop kind of a singular moment where we know the world title is going to happen because it's the most important moment in surfing. And for 4 decades, all we've been able to do is kind of blindfold ourselves and throw a dart at the back 3 or 4 months of the year and guess, which hasn't been great. And we kind of put it out there, and I kind of thought, they're going to be like, no thanks. But to a person in the room, they're like, yeah, no, I want to win in the water. I don't want to win the locker room. And I want to beat the best people of the season on the day. Now, that doesn't mean that it translates specifically into what we've designed, but I was pretty shocked. And I said, well, like if the world champs and the people that are in the running for the world title don't have a problem with it, like who am I? Here we are on the Chopes conversation or the Pipeline conversation.
I mean, you guys are putting on the tour and paying for it.
Oh, so of course. Okay. But I guess, and I'm not trying to kind of like make a case for it, but this is kind of how was my experience in becoming a fan of it. And I mean, whether I am or not, I think we're all going to watch. The lower trestles thing to me in terms of performance, it's only at lower trestles for this year. We're going to change the venue every year. Compared to somewhere like Chopu or Cloudbreak or Pipe, etc., I understand the argument of it's more conducive to the surfer's performance as opposed to, oh, you got the 12-footer at Chopes, you win kind of thing, which I get. True. If you're going to eliminate kind of, look, it comes down to performance on that final day, not the ocean, but I could make an argument for it. In any event, it's funny because I've heard a bunch of arguments, especially lately, where like worst case scenario this year, Gabriel and Carissa are so far ahead. And I'm like, that's not the worst case scenario. I'm like, the worst case scenario under that argument is they win 10 events and then they don't win the final. And people kind of say, well, if Morgan Sibilic, blazes through the top 5 on the final day and wins the world title, that's not worthy. It's like, I think if he does that, that's worth something. So anyway, we're all going to find out together, as you said.
I don't think he's even going to be in the top 5 when that happens. But I think most of us kind of have the scenario in our head that could happen, and it would be a little rough. Couple certain guys that would squeak into the top 5 and then go on a roll.
That could easily happen. We'll see what happens in September. Before we go, we got 2 more segments. We've got our questions from the Instagram community. So this was the Instagram community was very fired up that we were having this conversation.
I wonder why.
I don't know. I mean, you're a social media personality, so I think that works. First question from Kiki_Ramos asks, what is the biggest mistake the average surfer makes when choosing a board?
I think sometimes overestimating their ability and the quality of waves and underestimating the crowds that they might have to deal with. So I think the biggest problem, the biggest mistake, and that's traditionally throughout history, I would say over the last 20 years, most surfers tend to overestimate maybe their ability and the waves that they're surfing. And then lately, I think the biggest mistake, and I'm part of the problem and I'm trying to be part of the solution, is everybody's on this volume bandwagon and just throwing out volumes and just like, oh, my last board was 34, I want 38. It's like, well, it's not the answer to your problems. So right now, that in the last few years, that's been the bane of my existence. It's just people in their mind, they get pegged to a volume and they don't understand how the volume contracts and expands as boards get longer, thinner, wider. So
it is though, as a customer, like I feel like it is the most constant metric that a customer can bring in, but maybe the way to approach it, and you can tell me if I'm wrong here, is I'm like my step down shortboard that I try to ride every day is 28.5 liters. I would like a fish, or I would like a step up, like do whatever you need to do, which is less like I need to go to 38 liters or whatever, but it's like, here's what works.
No,
like,
or the
tell
guy,
me how
or
that
the
works.
guy who says, or the guy who rides a 5'10", 28.5 liter shortboard. And he's like, oh, I'm going to the men's. I want like a 6'2", 28.5 liters. And you're like, my problem is I'm not sitting there face to face with the guy most of the time nowadays. It's more like an order comes in through a shop or an email or online or whatever. And it's like, you just want to go, dude, even if I take your 5'10", that's 28 liters, and leave the thickness and the width the same and stretch it to a 6'2", it's going to be 32 liters,
Right.
And you have to, you can't just tell me what you want the volume to be, because you don't want to make it thinner. Maybe the rails are going to be thinner by design, but you want the reason you're getting a bigger board is so you can paddle it and drive and ride bigger waves, So there's a lot of that. And then the fish on the other end, the guy goes, I read 20.5 liters. So, I want, it's just when you're fine tuning and you're going from like a 5'10" short squash to a 5'11" round tail. And when you know someone's volume, it's like, I call it the 5th dimension or the 4th dimension. It's length, width, thickness, and volume. And it's basically just a lot easier when you have 3 ways to triangulate what you're trying to create for someone, you can get it to a certain depth, a certain focus. If you had another way to do it, you're going to get even more pinpointed. So you can do length, width, thickness the same, and you can do a 5'10", 18.5, 2.25 that's 25 liters, or you can have one that's 26.5 liters with all the same dimensions. So having that guy's volume, it really helps you fine tune and get where this guy is or where you. And then it helps go in small changes, but to just dictate it going from a 5'10" shortboard to a 5'5" fish or a 6'2" board to go to Hawaii, you kind of you can't get married to volume. Or when someone goes, I want to try a mid-length now, my volume's 28. I'm like, well, Doesn't matter. You want to try mid-length. Don't even, who the fuck cares what the volume is? You're going to go, let's go a foot longer. Let's go 6'8" and 21.5 and go out there and see what you think. It is what it is.
I like it. That's a great answer. Okay. Next question, board related. Sergio Sangramon, I apologize, I probably butchered that. Question is, where do you see the future of board materials going?
Up, as in pricing. I see the future of materials getting harder to get and higher priced. It's crazy what's going on right now, but that's a big discussion. More and more of the epoxy composite boards have become more and more acceptable as younger kids learn on epoxy boards, basically EPS, styrofoam, or even composite boards with inlays on the deck and bottom, firewire type stuff. As the generations were raised on them, they become more comfortable with them, and they become slowly and surely more accepted. EPS is still it's really only about 20% of our business, but 10 years ago it was 5% of our business. It's growing. So I think epoxy resin is going to continue to become more and more prevalent and a bigger part of the boards. I think the EPS core, it has certain limitations and it takes a lot of work for it to really feel right on extreme and the kind of waves that are primarily surfed on the WCT, like Margaret River or even that windy Rottnest or Bells Beach and stuff. It takes a certain amount of it's a slow process. It's a slow process for materials to change, and I think that one of the big things is the most of the skilled labor is really adept at working with polyurethane foam, polyester resin. It's affordable. They're made almost every surfing country. They're still made at a really effective and sustainable manner. There's like a lot of blanks being made, and they're really good service. And the resin comes, and it's kind of easy to work with. And it's going to take a really seismic shift for it to reverse. So we're like 80% of the boards in the world are EPS and 20% are poly. I think it's an ongoing process, but I think it's a very slow and methodical one because the traditional surfboard is so anchored in our culture, that it's and it works. They work. And they're still relatively affordable.
Well, it does feel that, like, I was gonna say, like, it feels like you and Lost Surfboards is arguably more explorative in alternative techs than probably any other board builder out there, certainly of that size. Everything from Avisos to varial foam to EPS cork, the cork board. Like you guys,
remember the Solomon. Remember the Solomon S?
I remember having to clean them because they're so porous, and like anyone would put their hand on it, and you couldn't sell it off the rack back at the surf center.
Yeah. That was just shitty sanding.
Yeah,
I remember those. I'm try always be open-minded for sure.
The lip tech stuff, like that's amazing.
The lip tech stuff.
Yeah,
it's amazing. But they're molded. So it's not molded in a bad sense. They're made in the most eco-friendly factory on planet Earth in Washington by a bunch of guys riding their skateboards around from mold to mold, putting all the parts together and shooting in the resin. And it's really cool. It's amazing. But they're static. You can't ride one and then go back to the factory and go, I just want to bring the edge up a little further and thin the rails and add a little more nose rocker and try it again. You can't do that.
Yeah.
And it's really easy to do that with polyurethane, polyester. It's a little bit harder to do it with styrofoam and epoxy. And, surfers, our culture has been raised to be really, really picky, to be really, really custom orientated, not just elite surfers, but 68-year-old guy who's like, oh, my shoulder's even worse this year. Let's go 4 inches bigger. Same rails, same width, but I want to go a little thicker and taper it down. I want it to feel the same, but like we're spoiled, or like a little 7-year-old kid wants a 4.3 and I want it 16 inches wide. It's something. It's a slippery slope that we don't want to. We want to keep that alive, and keep that part of our life. part of our culture. So you have the Libtex that have their place, and you have like these stock boards that go to stores that people like Firewire or us, we have stock dimensions, and that's the bulk of our business. But having the customizable, little tweaks and idiosyncrasies is what separates us from mountain bikers and snowboarders and skiers and tennis players, where you're just grabbing, unless you're whatever, Serena Williams, you're pretty much just grabbing a racket at Big Five and going to play tennis. So we have something special.
Last question from the Instagram community. SCR Hodgson? Oh, no. I like the question, though. If you could have any surfer currently not on your team riding Mayhems, who would it be?
That's a good question. Any surfer currently not on Mayhems. Wouldn't even know where to go. Most of those gnarly guys ride my friends' boards.
Well, you don't have to poach him. What if just no one's feelings got hurt? You just your ideal guy that started riding Mayhems for feedback and sort of like prestige purposes.
I'm not even gonna say a name, but I think right now it'd be really fun to work with a top shelf Australian surfer. Yeah. It was really fun working with Taj for all those years, and we still work with him, but and Tyler was great. And we work with some really good young surfers in Australia. So we're kind of, the way we've always run our business is we sort of grow from the farm system. We rarely like went out and made deals with like established stars to try and, what do you call it? A free agent.
Right.
So we usually we rate, Griffin, Kolohe, Carissa, they all started riding our boards as, damn near, young kids, and raise them up. Eli Hanneman, who's, but yeah, it'd be just for kind of balance. It'd be right now, if you ask me strategically, it would be cool to have a really top-notch Australian to work with. And COVID and the not being able to go to Australia and be a part of the community there and build boards, which is what I was doing a lot of the last few years, kind of makes it even harder.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I like that answer. I think it's a good one. Well, so if you sign a top tier Australian talent, we'll say that we broke that news here at some point. Final segment.
I think we're gonna raise one.
That's good.
I think we're gonna raise one.
I think that's actually a really I'd love for. I mean, maybe we start talking about it on the podcast, but I would love for the surf media to start to talk about that kind of stuff, because I do think it's really interesting how both board builders and brands say, oh, look, we can go out and we can buy someone. We can go pay money for a LeBron James or something, or we can raise one, you
raise them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Final segment is the lightning round. It's 10 questions. You can answer as fast as you can. If you personally could only have one board set up for the rest of your life, single fin, twin fin, thruster, quad, bonzer, or finless, what would you choose?
Quad.
Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Burrito or pizza?
Burrito.
Last book you read?
I have 4 kids. What is the Mickey Dora book? For a Few Good Waves.
Oh, David Renson.
Yeah, I read it at Lakey Peak in December, where our son and I went to Lakey Peak for a couple of weeks in December. And if you've been there, there's nothing there except surf and veg.
I really like that book. I thought it was great.
I loved it because you could read it. You didn't get sucked in and feel like you just have to keep reading till 3 a.m. Like when I get on a real book, you could just grab it because it's all just short little boom, boom, boom. Chapters are 4. Yeah, vignettes. There you go.
I loved it. Best surf film ever?
Endless Summer.
One wave you never have to go back to?
One wave I never have to go back to. Oh no, it's hard to say. One wave I'd never have to. Can we come back to that one?
Yeah, if you want. If you only get to surf one wave the rest of your life?
I could pick any wave?
Any wave you want.
With or without the crowd?
Whatever. We say without, just for answer's sake.
If I could only surf one wave the rest of my life. How about rifles in the mental waves?
I like it. Where am I? Best person to share the lineup with?
a good goofy footer going left on the peak.
Worst person to share the lineup with?
Chris Ward.
Finish this sentence as the last one. I will next achieve a state of happiness by
refilling my cocktail after this is over.
Well, this is over. Where can people check your stuff out? We re-releasing the RNF 96. What should people be excited about?
Yeah, we're releasing the Run Us Fish 97.
96.
No, I'm sorry, 96. What am I saying? Yeah. Oh yeah, we released the 96. 25 years since we kind of first started selling them. Having a lot of fun with that. We finally got out of the rhythm of releasing 3 to 5 models every year, which is a nightmare of product development. And because of the blessing of COVID, we're just so buried building all of our existing boards that we just wanted to do one really special thing this spring and summer. And that's what we're doing.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, Matt, I really appreciate the time. I appreciate our friendship and conversations off the podcast as well. And I look forward to seeing you up at Surf Ranch.
Thank you. You too. Appreciate it.